Hello, everyone, and welcome to CID's uh, webinar, Insurance for Nonprofit Social Services. You're going to learn all about that today. My name is Anae Augustini. I'm CEO of CID Insurance Programs, and I want to introduce Kristen Hazard, VP, Nonprofit Regional Leader of USLI. We're lucky to have her as an instructor. She's really knowledgeable, so you're going to learn a lot in this. And then, to make it even better, we got Michelle Belden, who's our nonprofit and commercial underwriter, and she's going to be providing a little bit of knowledge as well. So, and also Jacob Cole, who's our marketing specialist, and he works in the background making sure that everything runs smoothly. So, let's talk about some logistics. So, you guys all know the routine these days, but you will be on mute, definitely able to hear, but not speak. So, but your voice is important, so please post any questions that you have in the chat room at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll stop and answer them. And remember, there's no question. Every question is a good question, so don't hesitate to ask questions. There'll be a short survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you very much, Anae, and everybody who's joining us today. So today, what are the objectives of what we're trying to learn? Well, we're going to spend some time on the social service opportunity, and this is a very, very broad industry segment, so we're going to be pretty high level. And as you have questions, please just chat those in, and we'll try to handle them as they come. But we're going to just talk about why now is such a great time to be looking at this industry segment as a target area, how we can handle that for you. There's a lot of changing standards and the marketplace is changing, so we'll learn a little bit more about what's happening there. But ultimately, we want you to walk away learning what does that mean, that term, social and human service? What are the coverages you should be concerned about? What do those coverages mean in real life? And how do you find more of these opportunities? And ultimately, if you have this business, how do you easily get quotes? And again, if there's anything else that you do want to learn, just let Michelle know for the future in regards to this segment, because it's just one small area of what we do together. So with social and human services opportunity, we have seen unprecedented growth in this area. I know for us as a company, new business submissions, new business premium are up in the 30% range. And what we've seen is that a lot of this is an impact from the post-pandemic era. And what we've seen is that the needs of communities have just changed significantly, and many nonprofits have rushed to answer that cause. Here are some examples of some of the areas where we see the needs, continually changing or continually needing the support of nonprofits. So, for example, there's 30 million children in the United States that currently live in low-income families or at-risk families, and there's a lot of programs that are serving these organizations. I think most of us are very aware that the homeless problem is continuously increasing in the United States. Substance and alcohol abuse are definitely also areas where there's increased awareness, less stigma, and people are seeking treatment. We have here that there's 21 million individuals over the age of 12 who need that treatment. Similarly with mental illness, it's a more common conversation these days, and you're able to say, hey, I need help. There's about 45 million people who are over the age of 18 that may have a mental illness of some sort, some level, and 35 million that receive care. And then in addition to that, there's even more organizations that have been forming in the past just 5 years, looking to address the needs that we see in regards to environmental causes, social justice issues, and just so many more things that are more relevant to today's society than what other issues have been in the past. We estimate there's about over 1 million social service entities in the United States, but there could be more, and they're in every single community, so it's worth keeping an eye out for. So what is changing in the landscape for these types of organizations? Well, we're seeing that new standards are really driving a high demand for insurance coverage, and there's a bunch of things that are happening here. Historically, a lot of nonprofits were covered under an umbrella of another organization, and if they were using somebody's space, it was okay. And now we're seeing that these organizations are instead limiting their own liability and recognizing there's a whole new exposure that's happening there. And so with that, you see use agreements and leases requiring at the baseline GL coverage, but potentially also excess limits. Any grant where someone is applying for funding in order to provide the services that they are, we're seeing that they're actually asking now for very specialized coverage, E&O, abuse, which isn't limited there, but D&O, umbrella sometimes. All of that's really being brought in because they want to make sure that this organization can persist and operate for a long term. And any contract for service. So if someone's tutoring at a school, those services are now, or those contracts are now requiring the errors and omissions, general liability, abuse, and umbrella. So I would say now more than ever, we're seeing a larger number of first-time buyers that have not had insurance in the past. They may have been in operation for 5-10 years. And this is the first time they're getting coverage. And similarly, we're also seeing many new organizations looking for coverage. So we just talked about how demand is increasing at an incredible rate. At the same time, we are seeing the market shrinking, and the available carriers who are handling this are some are exiting the market, some are very much changing their underwriting guidelines and what they can do. And another idea here too is that oftentimes when I get a risk, I see that an organization may be written as an office, and yet they're providing tutoring and housing and all these different things. It's because they're being misclassified and being put on these little bops with different carriers. And now they're realizing as they look at their book that this is not what they intend to write with that office class code. And so some of these general carriers are making sure they're becoming more disciplined and making sure that they're not writing this business that they don't really want to write. So we see a lot of folks who are being non-renewed that we are looking at a first time for coverage and helping them actually get the right coverages in place. Some lines of coverage are more impacted by these changing standards now. Abuse and molestation is one great example. So a few years ago, I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with the term look-back laws, but many states allowed for this period, this window of where individuals could bring a lawsuit for past allegations of abuse. And that could be, there's no time limit to that. That's what they did, is they removed that time limit and said, in this period of a year, you can bring a claim for something that may have happened in the 60s and the 50s. So you might be familiar with what happened to Boy Scouts of America and some of the religious organizations in the United States. That was a huge impact that scared a lot of carriers because now they didn't have a good grip on the actual exposure. And so some raised rates, some said, we're not writing this anymore. Some said, we're not going to offer anything but a sublimit. And especially this really impacted organizations who are working with youth. There's enhanced scrutiny, and the underwriting process got to be very, very difficult. So that's one thing that's impacting a lot of these organizations as well. Umbrella and excess, there's less availability of higher limits today than there might have been a few years ago. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the changes in the property market and because of catastrophes, and even really, if you could lump in there nuclear verdicts and how we've become a more litigious society. All of that is driving rate increases and now a need for remarketing because for nonprofits, their budget is critical, and truthfully, the last thing they want to use that for is spending for insurance. So if we can find a way to reduce costs, we're going to be in a good spot. So that's a big part of what we're talking about today is that our hope is to provide that efficient solution for you all. USLI, CID together, we're able to package 8 lines of coverage on one policy. Really what that doesn't include would be workers' comp and commercial auto. But with that, you could just do a single line or you could do multiple lines. And we'll talk a little bit more about that coming in the next few slides. One key element, if you remember anything from today, one key element is that you can get a quote over the phone for these risks. It could be something like prison counseling. Truthfully, I worked on one the other day, or tutoring, or just a simple community center. But with some basic information, we can actually quote these risks over the phone for you. Or similarly, you could just email any application you have and get a quick turnaround. So one of the big things I want to stress is that we are not requiring specific supplementals. We're not requiring proof of 501c3 status. We're just trying to make this as easy as possible. We're not requiring extensive financials unless it's a larger organization. So my goal, is really to state that we're going to be the easiest to do business with on social and human services. And then we can offer admitted status with direct bill, which makes it so much easier to renew accounts because they're automatically invoiced. And all in all, in the long term, it makes it a very easy process. So
Kristen, if I could just stop you for 1 second. I do also want to mention to everybody that while USLI is one of our main markets for the nonprofits and social services, if there's something that for some reason doesn't fit with their, a specific class of business, or maybe they have some loss history that doesn't fit, we do have other markets. While this one maybe focused a little bit, presentation is more focused a little bit on USLI side of things. We do have other markets, so if it's not something that necessarily fits with them, I can definitely look elsewhere. Just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a fair point, because we will talk a little bit about some of our limitations in a couple slides, so that you'll know that at least Michelle has other options for you. But in regards to the USLI product and the social service appetite, what we're looking at is actually, I know this looks like a very simple slide, but there's about 200 different types of classifications we can look at. And so trying to break that down into some more digestible classes, we have community support organizations is probably what most commonly we see. And this is a wide range of group, anything from like a food bank to a community center to a thrift store. It might also include things like botanical gardens or beautification, community gardens, even animal shelters could fit within this group. So overall, community support organization is a pretty generic group. We're usually often looking at the square footage. If they have any professionals such as counselors or social workers or whatnot, that would impact our rate for the E&O. One other big class we see, and it a bit is on the rise as well, is residential programs. And so with taking this into two different areas, looking at things like abused adult shelters or halfway houses, you may even see this as like part of a substance abuse program, or homeless shelters. We're going to work on risks that are 30 beds or less. And we do ideally like to have 24/7 on-site supervision. So again, for the USLI product, that's probably going to throw us out of things like apartment-style living environments, but where we want, a common area and really that supervision in place, because these are individuals who don't know each other and they may be stressed. It helps to have somebody intervene. What's not mentioned here is we also do work on group homes, and that can be a far-reaching class as well. Group homes are a much more specialized service, and we're going to have a much higher requirement for staffing to patient guidelines, but here we can do 8 beds or less. So that's, and all of this from the residential program is really going to be on a nonprofit basis. We're not looking at the for-profit residential programs. Counseling, again, very wide ranging. It can be anything from stress to substance abuse. Substance abuse is probably what we're most regularly seeing. Mental health, all of that. The key here is that we're talking non-medical. So it wouldn't be the kind of, where they're prescribing medications or, prescribing a course of behavioral health changes, but instead it's more like talk therapy. Group therapy is another great example of where we could be very effective. So there's a lot within the counseling, whether it's for youth or adults, there's a lot there. And then finally, youth and senior outreach. Again, it's going to fit that mold of anything like after-school programs, mentoring, maybe even sport programs, or science and technology, engineering and math programs. And then with the seniors, you're going to look at more like at the caregivers and Meals on Wheels programs. So a wide variety of different types of risk, and we'll help walk through anything that you might need from a rating basis. But usually if you do have square footage or the type and number of professionals that they have, that's a really, really good starting place for us. So what typically does not fit the USLI program? We're still looking at adoption and foster care. It's just a very, very high hazard class with, the pricing is way outside of our model. And so that's something we wouldn't do. If there's overnight camping, like those adventure programs where maybe they're taking people rock climbing and then camping out in the woods, stuff like that wouldn't be our fit. Anything that's heavy in construction, Habitat for Humanity is a great example of what we wouldn't do. I'll qualify that you might have some organizations like caregivers, for example, may do things like weatherization. That might be that they might go help with light bulbs or the windows at maybe a senior's house, or even maybe just help install insulation and things like that. That is something we can look at. So at the end of the day, it's always worth checking, and we can tell you where our qualification will stand, and we'll do that pretty quickly for you. But again, any adverse loss history or true controversial operations, we may be able to do, we may have to limit in some ways, shape, or form, but ultimately, those are kind of the bigger things that we run into that could be problematic when we're reviewing. And again, if it's something that I can't do, obviously Michelle's going to pick up and run with it for you. For now, the product features for what we have today are really, really broad, and it's really a strong, one of the, I would say, best products out there, especially built for not-for-profit organizations. From a general liability standpoint, we are providing an errors and omissions component. And to take a moment here, I want to stress how important it is to have both the GL and the E&O together on a lot of these risks. Why might that be? Well, here's the thing, is that you're providing a professional service. Sometimes it can be very difficult to distinguish where that bodily injury or loss comes from. So if you have two carriers handling the GL and the E&O, what will happen in the event of a claim is the GL carrier is going to say, well, that came out of the professional service, and the E&O carrier is going to say, well, no, I really think that's because of the premises, and they're going to fight. And at the end of the day, it's going to get more and more expensive and more frustrating for the social service organization. It really truly is a much better situation to have both the general liability and the E&O together with one carrier, so there's no question. They know it's covered, now it's just which form applies. So I just want to stress that if you have that available, it's really critical to make sure that those two are packaged together. With our GL, we're also including the blanket special events, and that's for events up to 1,000 attendees. We don't ask any additional questions. It's an automatic throw-in. There's no cost associated with it. But what we recognize is many of these organizations might have a few smaller events throughout the year, and usually it's something like a dinner or an auction, maybe even a golf outing. And so we recognize it doesn't really present a significant increase in exposure. So why even make it a difficult thing? So we're really trying to make it much easier to get all of their needs met in one step. A piece of molestation, we can offer this up to $1 million for most classes of business. We will have differing underwriting guidelines depending upon the severity of the potential exposure. So as you can imagine, if we're writing something like a food bank, we will automatically provide that $1 million of coverage, no questions asked. No price associated. If you have something like a youth mentoring organization where there might be offsite one-on-one, or they're taking kids to college campuses and the parents aren't there, something like along those lines, well, we're going to be sublimited in that instance. So again, it is different depending upon the operations that they have, but we'll always make sure you're aware of what is available to you. Almost always there's a sublimit that will be available for no additional cost, and we usually will have that ability to go up to $1 million. And then higher non-known auto. This is an area too where there's confusion. Like take a risk like a caregiver, where they might be visiting seniors and just helping them make sure that they're reading and have some companionship there. They will also potentially take individuals to doctor's appointments, or run them out to the grocery store, things like that. So client transportation is fine. When we're looking at higher non-known auto with social services, we want to know how many drivers, what's the frequency, and ultimately, really, is it a daily thing? Is it a weekly thing? We just want to make sure that they're verifying that individuals have their own personal auto in place. Property, usually with these risks, they don't necessarily have extensive property, but we could do building or contents up to $3 million total insurable value. We can include crime as well, which, really I'm referencing employee dishonesty with that. The nonprofit directors and officers is also a very critical piece of this puzzle. We can include it on the policy. There's a great responsibility that these organizations have to the public, to their patients, to their clients, whatever you want to call them. But also, they're usually getting funding from the community, and they want to make sure that they're making responsible decisions. They can't control who might believe they're not doing that. And so to have that coverage in place to protect the board members for the decisions they're making is critical. We also will include an optional piece for employment practices. A key element here that I like to point out is that I know a lot of these organizations don't actually have paid employees, but volunteers are considered insured. So that's important, but also you're getting third-party discrimination and harassment with that EPL piece. So again, it's not required, but it is an option that is important to talk over. And then with all of these, we can provide excess and umbrella up to $5 million in a very easy step there. So that's covering a lot there. Just hitting on the minimum premiums. Our goal is to have low minimum premiums because a lot of times we are writing startups. So for instance, in the state of California, you may be as low as $500. In other states, that'll start as low as $735. That, when I say general liability, just to remind you, will include the 3 towers of coverage, that GL, E&O, and abuse and molestation. The property could start as low as $250. And then directors and officers with EPL, but depending on coverage options that are selected, can be as low as $565. So again, it can be a very effectively priced program. Here are just some examples to give you some context about all the coverage we were just talking about. That professional or E&O, there's a lot of questions as to how that might come up. Well, let's just say you're writing a hospice organization and they are delivering with IV drugs. Now, they might not be prescribing, they just might be the person administering those. If there's a rash, for example, here, that's where that coverage line is going to apply. With abuse and molestation, unfortunately, that's, there's a lot more examples that we could think about in our daily occurrence. But here, if there's an organization that might be doing some outdoor camping, you could have that situation that something happens with one of the counselors with a child. And again, whether or not, it's so important here that whether or not that actually happens or if it's just an allegation, an organization is going to want to have that coverage in place so that they have a defense and response in those scenarios. And then finally, again, coming back to that directors and officers, as mentioning how they have this responsibility to manage their money wisely. Well, we see quite often where that's definitely just a sort of a judgment in how money's being used. So you might have an organization where a donor provides a large contribution and states they want that money to be used, for this cause. And in this example here, it's to enhance the building's facilities. And instead, the board chooses to buy the new car for the community center director. There might be a very valid purpose behind buying that car, but it doesn't meet the purpose that that donor had originally stated. So therefore, they're going to want their money back. They are going to allege misappropriation of funds. So coming back to how critical it is to have that coverage in place. And then here are just some examples, again, to give more context of what we're talking about when we talk about social and human services. There's a wide variety here. So, some of the things we're seeing more regularly now that we're getting close to the beginning of the school year, or really the school year started, we're seeing a lot of youth programs. So that could be a youth nutrition program that we wrote pretty recently. And what they're dealing with is really helping kids understand meal planning and helping them learn how to cook and use those sort of skills in their life as they continue on. Homeschool co-op, is another example of where you have kids who might not be going to public school or private school, but they're being homeschooled, and instead they're just meeting once or twice a month, or maybe even weekly, to have that more social engagement and to take classes. I won't go through all of them, but you can see there's a wide variety between like literacy programs, residential services, vocational sheltered workshops, and youth centers, just giving kids a safe place to be. So, and there's a variety in the different packages that we can offer there. So with all of that in mind, how do you go and find more of this? Well, there's one really cool tool that we like to share. It's called Cause IQ. So you can see the website there. And you just go to the site. I encourage you all to just go and play around. It's really just taking all of the data from individuals filing their tax forms. So it's just information from the IRS, and it's just organized, and you can use it. You can sort it. You can sort by revenue. You can sort by location. You can sort it by the different types of organizations. So here's an example. Let's say we wanted to target organizations in San Diego. So you can see the variety of different types. There's almost 3,000 religious organizations, and maybe there's 1,051 human service organizations. You can kind of key into what you might have an interest in targeting. And then you can click on any of those different classifications to pull up the different types of organizations that references. And here I sorted by a smaller revenue size, but you can see like the Junior Sale Foundation, the Seth Foundation, San Diego Play Fair. There's all different things. Now, each one of these is hyperlinked. So, another one that I just pulled up is the Carlsbad Christmas Bureau. Just again, as an example, it gives you a description then of what that organization does, tells you a bit about their revenues. It will link potentially to their 990 if they filed one. It can link to their website. It'll show you who the personnel are, like down here at the bottom, we see who the president and the secretary are. And it gives you a really great starting point from understanding the risk, and then maybe even potentially building a story of how you can provide some help. And then, one last thing I want to mention, just because this was a new update just about the other day, is that we offer with our policies at USLI access to the Business Resource Center. And so, you can feel free, again, to check this out on your own. bizresourcecenter.com will get you there. And then just go to the nonprofit tab. It looks like this, picture here with these people putting money in a heart in a jar. But once you get there, it will take you through different services that are available to any policyholder, and even different information that they can read and learn a bit more. So, like for instance, from this screenshot, if you had someone working with children, they could click on the Explore Youth Services and see what's available to them. And that's going to include things like background checks on a discounted basis. Similarly, other general operational services that they can access would be like People Systems, and that's a free HR helpline, so they can ask a lot of questions about operations and get good advice. eRisk Hub to help them with cyber concerns, and even discounted online sexual harassment training. This is just a small representation of what's available, but it's now at a new layout and makes it a lot easier.
Kristen, we have a question, and since you're a little bit more familiar with the Cause IQ, I think it would be good for you to answer this one. So the question is, they're wanting to know if contact details are provided. I'm assuming you're meaning for like the people that are running the organization. I'm assuming that's what you're meaning by the question. So I know on the, what was it, like the third one slide of it, that it showed a breakdown. Yes.
Yes, no, great question. It depends on, I guess, the information that's available, which will also then depend on the size of the organization. If there is a website, it will be linked, and that can tell you, potentially how to find and contact these individuals. Your 990 will also potentially give some of that information, so that will be linked as well. So you can see under Carlsbad here, it says Form 990s. You could click on that and see. And even here where it says peers, if you click on that, it'll show similar organizations to this one. Personnel will just kind of give you the information without the actual contact info. So you might just have to make a couple extra steps to find who those folks, how to contact them, but that will typically be found in the 990 or on their website. Great question.
And then I just wanted to add as another way to, try to find this type of business, something I referenced to other brokers and things like that, go to your local church. Plenty of those people are working with other organizations. So, it's definitely a good avenue to try to find, get your foot in the door to find these organizations to help them find the coverage that they need. Or if you're part of your local chamber of commerce, again, you're going to, find many of these organizations through that way, because they're all coming together because they're part of the chamber as well, or, they're helping sponsor any events or doing something with the city. So those are different avenues you guys can look at to try and, drum up this business. Some people I know are kind of afraid of nonprofits because they think it's a little scary or something. Really, it's not that difficult. Just like it's, learning what coverages they actually need. And once you get that down, it's pretty easy, if you ask me.
And it's a great point. I mean, you think about any of these organizations, most of the time we see them, they're tenants. So, or they're using someone's space, like event venues and things like that. So you can usually use those as great contacts to help lead you in. But I'll also share that if you write one nonprofit, there's so many that they are connected to, because that's just the nature of nonprofits, that they usually will create a great referral resource for you in the future. And so that's an important thing to think about, is the opportunity in the long term from a referral standpoint is pretty huge with the nonprofit sector. So other ways and other things to think about, if you have any business that, whether it is being in need of being remarketed or it's new business to you, and you want to see what we can do, please, we'll tell you how you can do that in a second. Send that in. And we'd love to get that process started. We'll never I know Michelle would never do this either. We'll never be like, why did you send this to me? No, we don't care. We'd rather have the opportunity to review it and see if there's something we can do here. So, more often than not, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Coming back to this idea of why do typically nonprofits look for coverage? Well, special events is usually one of the starting points because that's how they fundraise. And so that could be a really great way to leverage them into an annual policy that, at the end of the day serves them better. It's cheaper. It'll give them broader coverage. So cross-selling that special event into and leveraging that into an annual policy can be a great way. Similarly with D&O and EPL, if you write just one line, it's a really great opportunity to try to see if you can write the remaining pieces. We find renewal retention on the package is significantly higher. So just something to consider. It usually makes it a lot harder to move because you've got a lot of different bells and whistles with it. Instant phone quote, we'll talk about that in a second, but that to me is one of the critical pieces of this story. So I don't really know of any other carrier that is willing to accept information, talk you through the account on the phone, and even advise on, or at least share what the coverages are meant to do and where there might be limitations and where there might be really great advantages. So you see that number there, 877-969-7539. You could call in any of these social service organizations or nonprofits. We do churches and condo and homeowner associations, a variety of different things with this phone line. And just kind of share the basic information that you have, even if it's something like, I don't even know if you guys would do it. It's a really great way to kind of, vet out, filter, and get through the easiest solution. You do have ability to web quote with CID. I will tell you that a good bit of the social service organizations are not going to be available on web quoting because they are kind of nebulous and confusing from time to time, and how to class them is not necessarily easy. We're working on it, but for right now, that's great for other types of not-for-profits, not so great with the social services. The best solutions, either that phone quote line or email the submissions into that submissions@cidinsurance.com, and that'll get that whole process started. But with that, I will turn it back over to Anae and Michelle.
Thank you, Kristen.
Right. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry,
That was
Anae.
great. No worries. That was great information. I learned a lot from it as well. Great ideas and suggestions. Make sure that you submit your nonprofits to Michelle or call in for a quote and make it easy for yourself. So please make sure that you visit our website if you haven't. We've got lots of marketing tools there for you. If you have any questions, please, you could still type them in, and we can answer them even off once we finish the webinar. If we would appreciate you completing the survey, and we look forward to doing business with you. So thank you for joining us.